What concerns exist when a so-called election denier could become the next supervisor of elections? You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. Republicans will choose the supervisor of elections in Lake County this month. Incumbent Alan Hays says Florida is the gold standard in election administration. Challenger Tom Vail is one of at least 9 supervisor candidates in Florida backed by election deniers, and his solutions could affect voters more than most. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns brings us a look at what's at stake for Lake County elections and beyond. That's ahead on The Wrap, the big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. North Florida residents are resting a bit easier now that Hurricane Debbie has moved on after making landfall Monday. WFSU's Adrian Andrews went out to some of the affected areas just a day after Debbie became the first storm of the season to make landfall in the state.
Almost every road is just littered in tree trash.
Tina Jackson moved to Madison, Florida just a year ago. She was out in Keaton Beach Tuesday for a change of scenery. As of Tuesday evening, more than 60% of customers in Madison, along with Jackson, were powerless. Debbie is Jackson's first hurricane experience.
It shows me what they can do. I hope they don't get bigger than a 1 or a 2. Yeah. And I did learn my house is sturdy. It didn't creak. It didn't sway. Nothing. So.
As of Tuesday evening, several restaurants, gas stations, and hardware stores have been reopened, mainly running off generators. Madison County officials say they're working to restore 100% of power as soon as possible. In the meantime, a mobile oxygen generator is available for citizens who have tanks needing to be filled, as well as a cooling and charging station located at a local church. For WFSU News, I'm Adrian Andrews.
Florida's COVID-19 cases in July were the highest of the year, state data show. Meanwhile, COVID vaccine levels are at a low and national hospitalizations are on the rise. Central Florida Public Media's health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen tells us that while the severity of COVID has lessened, its high presence coupled with low vaccine levels is a threat to those with autoimmune deficiencies or people 65 years and older.
So far this year, about 400,000 people have received the vaccine booster in Florida, a fraction compared to 15 million in 2021, the first full year of vaccine availability. Dr. Cindy Prinz is an epidemiologist at the University of Central Florida. She and other experts think a number of factors are responsible for low rates, like COVID news fatigue and people not keeping up to date with vaccines. Another cause for concern is that the virus's current mutation makes it less severe for most people, but Dr. Prinz says that isn't always the case.
I think that's another thing that we tend to forget, that it can be a really miserable disease. And even if you didn't have a bad bout of it last time, if you get it this time, you may have a lot more problems.
Journey Shapiro is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Florida. She says the low vaccine totals plus the rising tide of COVID as students head back to school is a troubling combination for some.
There is still a portion of the population that is at an increased risk for severe outcomes. And that is where we really want to make sure those individuals understand that they're at risk.
The vaccine is available at most pharmacies and grocery stores. A new vaccine is expected to come out in the fall to provide protection against winter strains. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
NASA is considering using SpaceX's Crew capsule to return 2 of its astronauts from the International Space Station who arrived on Boeing's Starliner back in June. Since Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams arrived, Boeing and NASA have been investigating a number of issues with the vehicle, including a helium leak and faulty thrusters. Boeing conducted tests of the thrusters and says confidence is high in returning the crew in Starliner, but NASA is unsure and has asked another commercial contractor, SpaceX, to come up with a plan to return the astronauts. NASA's Steve Stitch says while the agency would like to return the crew on Starliner, all options are on the table.
Now, we haven't approved this plan. In other words, we've done all the work to make sure this plan is there. We have the suits identified to fly up on Crew 9. We have the seats set up so that we can fly a multiple complement of people.
The plan would involve sending an already scheduled crewed mission to the station with only 2 astronauts and having Wilmore and Williams hitch a ride back home in February. NASA says it will make a decision on the return plans sometime this month. More Central Florida news stories on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. It's been a hot summer for all of us, especially those working outside. That includes food truck operators and chefs who brave temperatures up to 180 degrees inside their mobile kitchens.
That heat grabs a hold of your lungs, almost like you're in a sauna. But if you try to gasp and get air in, it's just going to punch you straight in the lungs.
How a passion for food outweighs the heat. That's at cfpublic.org. Republican voters will pick the Lake County Supervisor of Elections in a closed primary this month, choosing between incumbent Alan Hays and challenger Tom Vail. Hays says Florida is the gold standard in election administration. Vail is one of at least 9 supervisor candidates in Florida backed by election deniers, and his solutions could affect voters more than most. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns takes a look at Vail's proposals.
Tom Vail has signs all over his gold Cadillac SUV to let you know exactly who he is. Christian nationalist, not a satanic globalist. They advertise his platform: one-day voting, hand-count ballots, limit absentee ballots. It's an agenda fueled by allegations of fraud after the 2020 election, which former President Donald Trump falsely claimed was rigged. The nonpartisan Brennan Center for Justice, which researches election security, says voter fraud is rare in today's elections. That's certainly not how Vail sees it.
There's voter fraud all the time. There's election fraud all the time.
Supervisors have a process to find and remove voters who moved away or died. Vail believes inaccuracies in that list create opportunities to cheat. He and a local group focused on election integrity have peppered Supervisor of Election Alan Hays with those concerns and other allegations. In campaign literature, Vail says Florida law has been controlled by leftist organizations to open, quote, multiple doors to voter fraud. Hays says not so.
For the last 3.5 years, we've been having all kinds of headwinds, harassment basically, from a group that we have labeled wackadoodles.
Lake County elections are secure, he says, and in 100% compliance with every statute. So how would Vail's ideas affect voters? For one thing, they would dramatically limit the opportunity to vote. Take, for example, one-day voting.
The point is it's more secure, it's more reliable, it's more trustworthy.
But there would be long lines. Vail says add more polling places and change your mindset.
Many times I've waited in lines, and people wait all the time, and saying we can't wait in line to vote. Voting for our government, for our elected officials, is one of the most important things you do.
Hayes argues that if you want full citizen participation, one-day voting is ridiculous.
But if you want to restrict the number of people who will vote, perhaps one-day voting would be your cup of tea.
Susan Gill was Citrus County's Republican Supervisor of Elections for 20 years. She says it would be difficult to cancel early voting and restrict mail-in ballots. The legislature would have to do it, and voters wouldn't stand for that.
Because our experience is that voters really like early voting and vote by mail.
They like the convenience and the time to research their vote.
I know in Citrus County we had like a third, which meant 2/3 of the people, 2/3 of the voters wanted to vote prior to Election Day.
Gill says there are also hurdles to counting votes by hand. You'll need a lot more staff, you'll lose accuracy, and it'll take forever. She says state law requires logic and accuracy tests on voting systems beforehand, along with post-election audits.
We supervisors, knowing what we know on this whole thing, we're very confident that absolutely the machine count is the best count.
Vail says he would do the machine tabulations required by law, but would also have teams of 4 working together under video surveillance to count the votes again on all the ballots, which in the last presidential election were more than 200,000 in Lake County.
There is a money issue involved, no doubt about it, but I think we can do a lot of it with unpaid volunteers too.
Vail says he has a plan. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
As we approach the August 20th primary, be sure to check out our voter guide. We ask candidates for Congress, State House, and Senate about their stance on the issues. Be sure to check it out online at cfpublic.org. That's it for the wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director LaToya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.